The forbidden distress signal. The hum of the spaceship Valkyrie filled the silence as Sergeant Jake Carter stared at the glowing control panel. Space stretched endless and dark outside the window, broken only by distant stars. It was supposed to be a simple patrol along the dead zone of Kryon IV. Nothing ever happened here. The war ended 20 years ago. The battlefields were cold, forgotten, like old bones buried in deep soil. Jake leaned back with a sigh. "Another quiet night," he muttered. Then the radio crackled to life. The sound made Jake sit straight. Static hissed, sharp like a snake's warning. He adjusted the frequency, frowning. This zone was silent for years. Who was sending a signal now? The static broke, replaced by a voice. Weak, strained, desperate. Help, trapped, no time left. Jake's heartbeat quickened. He checked the signal source. It came from the surface of Kryon IV, near an old battlefield. His training screamed in his mind. Ignore non-human signals. Leave dead zones untouched. Earth's military laws were clear. Kryon IV was a restricted graveyard planet. No rescues, no landings, no exceptions. He reached for the comms to report the signal, but his hand froze. The voice spoke again. Softer now, more broken. "Please, anyone, help me. Alone, so long." Jake squeezed his eyes shut. The tone in that voice, it was pain. The kind of pain soldiers knew. The kind of pain that didn't lie. He remembered his own past. The day he was pinned under rubble during the siege of Titan. His leg broken, blood pooling around him. He had cried for help too, waiting for hours. Someone had come for him then. Disobeyed orders to pull him out. Now someone else was crying for help. Forgotten. Left behind. Jake clenched his jaw and flipped a switch. "Ship AI, plot a course to the signal." "Warning," said the robotic voice. "Landing on Kryon IV is prohibited. Override. Authorization code. Carter Bravo 742. Code accepted. Course locked." The ship tilted, engines humming louder as it descended toward the planet. Jake gripped the controls, guilt and determination fighting inside him. He was risking his career, maybe even his life. But some rules weren't made to be followed. Not when someone needed help. The ship sliced through thick gray clouds and broke into view of the surface. Kryon IV looked like a corpse. Broken buildings, scorched earth, and shattered war machines stretched across the land. The remains of a war between Earth and the Kryon species, a war humanity won. The signal pulsed from a ruined bunker near a rusted ridge. Jake landed nearby, grabbed his pulse rifle, and stepped outside. The air was stale and cold. His boots crunched over ash and metal fragments. He scanned the area. Silent. Dead. The bunker door was half buried under debris. The signal was strongest here. He pushed aside fallen beams and rusted plates. The door creaked open. A metallic staircase led down into darkness. His flashlight cut through the shadows. The walls were scarred from old blasts. The deeper he went, the colder the air grew. The signal led him to a control room at the bottom. In the corner, half covered in rubble, lay a figure. Jake's breath caught. The figure wore ancient battle armor, cracked and faded. The helmet's visor was broken, revealing gray skin and sharp alien features. Kryon, one of Earth's old enemies. The alien's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The voice from the radio whispered from a nearby transmitter. Jake crouched and pressed his fingers to the alien's neck. A faint pulse. Alive. His training said, "Leave it." Kryon soldiers were killers. They deserved their fate. But Jake saw more than an enemy. He saw a warrior left behind, just like he once was. He pulled a stim pack from his belt and injected it into the alien's neck. The alien stirred, eyes opened, pale yellow, filled with confusion and fear. The mouth moved, voice raspy. You are human," the alien said. "Yeah," Jake answered, lowering his rifle slightly. "I'm here to help." The alien tried to sit up, but pain twisted its face. "Should not be here. They come. Soon." "Who comes?" Jake asked. The ground suddenly vibrated. The lights flickered. Jake's radio crackled. "Unregistered human craft detected. Initiating defense protocols." Jake swore and turned to the alien. "Can you walk?" The alien nodded weakly. Jake hauled it to its feet. The bunker walls groaned as mechanical sounds echoed from above. Old war drones, awakening after decades of silence. They raced up the stairs. At the top, shadows shifted. Metallic bodies stepped into view, sleek, insect-like machines with glowing red eyes. Their guns clicked into position. Jake raised his rifle. "Stay behind me." The alien warrior spoke softly, voice grim. "No, we fight together." The drones opened fire. Enemy of my enemy. The air filled with the sharp crack of gunfire. Jake Carter pressed against the cold wall of the ruined bunker, heart pounding. Red laser blasts streaked past him, burning deep holes into the concrete. The old war drones were relentless, machines with a single purpose: destroy intruders. Beside him, the Kryon warrior shifted, gripping a broken metal pipe as a makeshift weapon. Her pale yellow eyes scanned the battlefield with practiced focus. She moved with the stiffness of someone waking from a long, painful sleep. "Drones are old," she said through gritted teeth, "but still deadly." "No kidding," Jake muttered, adjusting his pulse rifle. "They're not happy we crashed their nap." The drones advanced across the open ground, their metal legs clicking like steel spiders. Their glowing eyes locked onto the bunker entrance. Jake counted 6. Too many. His rifle's power gauge blinked yellow. "Low energy. We won't last here," he said. "We need a plan." The Kryon warrior knelt beside him. "The control tower." She pointed toward a distant tower rising from the ruined landscape. "Built to command defense systems. We shut it down. Drones stop." Jake peeked through a crack in the wall. The tower stood half a mile away across open ground. A killing field. The drones would see them the moment they ran. "Risky," Jake said, "but better than dying here." The Kryon nodded. "We run together." They shared a quick glance of understanding. No time for trust, only survival. "On 3, Jake said. 1, 2, 3. They burst from cover, sprinting into the open. The drones reacted instantly, unleashing a storm of red fire. The ground exploded behind them with each impact. Jake zigzagged, lungs burning, rifle clutched tight. A blast grazed his shoulder. Heat seared through his armor. He stumbled but didn't stop. Beside him, the Kryon warrior moved with surprising speed, her steps steady despite her injuries. The tower's entrance came into view, a rusted hatch, half-closed and covered in debris. Jake reached it first, slammed his shoulder into the metal, and forced it open. They tumbled inside, breathing hard. The door slammed shut just as laser blasts pounded against it. The drone scratched and clawed outside, metal limbs screeching against the surface. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by their ragged breaths. Jake slid down the wall, wincing. His shoulder armor was scorched, and the skin underneath throbbed with pain. "Nice plan," he said. "Name's Jake, by the way." The Kryon hesitated. "Xyra," she said at last. "Xyra of the Kryon Guard." Jake's breath caught. The Kryon Guard were legendary soldiers, known for their fierce loyalty and deadly skill. Earth forces once called them the Unbreakables. "No offense," Jake said, eyeing her damaged armor, "but your guard looks pretty broken." Xyra almost smiled. "Guard died here. I stay behind to stop. The weapon." Jake frowned. "Weapon? What weapon?" Before she could answer, the tower trembled. The walls groaned. Jake scanned the control panel beside him. Old red lights blinked across the interface. "Something's powering up," he said, tapping the screen. The drones aren't just guarding this place. They're calling someone. Zyra's eyes darkened. The hunter. The hunter, Jake repeated. Who's that? She grabbed the pipe and stood. He came after the war. A scavenger. Took control of old Kryon tech. Killed my squad. I tried to stop him, but he trapped me in stasis. Jake's gut tightened, and now he's coming here. The tower's comms system crackled. A voice filled the room. Smooth, cold, amused. Sergeant Jake Carter of Earth Command, the voice said. I've been watching you. Jake froze. Who the hell are you? Captain Rylos, the owner of this graveyard. And the Kryon beside you belongs to me. Zyra's jaw clenched. He hunts survivors, sells them as trophies or tools. Jake gripped his rifle tighter. You're not getting her, Rylos. A low chuckle echoed through the speakers. How noble. A human protecting a Kryon. Your own commanders wouldn't approve, Sergeant. You're a traitor now. Yeah, well, Jake said, never liked the rulebook anyway. The tower shook again. Outside, the sky filled with movement. Dozens of war drones swarmed toward the tower, their metal bodies glinting under Kryon IV's pale sun. He's sending everything he's got, Jake said. We won't survive a direct fight. Zyra pointed to the main console. The old defense cannons. I can activate them. Do it. Jake knelt beside the door, aiming his rifle. The drones outside climbed the walls, claws screeching. Zyra's fingers flew across the ancient controls. The system groaned, unresponsive. Come on, she whispered. The drones reached the windows. Metal limbs smashed against the glass. Jake fired, hitting one drone through the eye. It collapsed, but two more took its place. Zyra, Jake shouted. Almost. The console beeped. Outside, massive turrets hidden in the ground roared to life. Blue energy blasts tore through the sky, ripping drones apart. The air shook with explosions. Jake peeked out. The drones fell like broken toys. In seconds, the battlefield was clear. Nice work, he said, standing. Zyra slumped against the console. Only temporary. Rylos will send more. Then we move, Jake said. He extended a hand. Zyra hesitated, then took it. As they left the tower, a drone's shattered remains crackled nearby. Its eye flickered, sending a final signal. Far above, hidden on a cloaked ship, Captain Rylos smiled. Run, little heroes, he said. The hunt has just begun. The hunter arrives. The sun of Kryon IV was a pale, sickly disk hanging low in the sky as Jake Carter and Sarah moved across the wasteland. The ground cracked under their boots, each step echoing across the lifeless battlefield. The air smelled faintly of rust and burned metal. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of shifting debris. Jake adjusted the strap of his pulse rifle and glanced at Tyra. The Kryon warrior walked with the stubborn grace of a soldier, though her movements were slow. Stasis sickness and old injuries weighed her down. Her gray skin was pale, her breathing shallow. But her eyes stayed sharp, scanning the horizon. You're hurt, Jake said. I'm breathing, she replied. Yeah, but for how long? She didn't answer. They passed the wreckage of an old tank-like war machine. Its hull was covered in claw marks, and its turret lay in the dirt like a broken limb. Jake tapped his helmet radio. Static. Earth Command had gone silent on him the moment he disobeyed orders. He was on his own now. Where are we going? He asked. Zyra pointed to the jagged outline of a city in the distance. Crumbling towers rose like shattered teeth from the earth. Central Command Core, she said. The weapons activation codes are there. Jake frowned. Why would Rylos want old codes from a dead war? Zyra's jaw tightened. Because the weapon isn't dead. It was hidden here. Forgotten. Jake's steps slowed. A planet killer. Not a planet killer, Zyra corrected. A life nullifier. It doesn't destroy planets. It destroys biology. Jake's stomach turned. A bioweapon. She nodded. The Kryon Guard tried to destroy it when the war ended. But Rylos, he found records. He knows it can wipe out any species in seconds. Jake exhaled through clenched teeth. So he wants to sell it. Or worse, use it. Yes, and if we don't stop him, billions will die. Silence stretched between them as the weight of her words settled in. They moved faster now, pushing toward the ruined city. But something shifted in the air. Jake felt it like a prickling along his neck. He stopped. Wait. Zara froze beside him. The landscape stretched empty in every direction. The wind stirred ash into lazy spirals. Jake scanned the horizon through his rifle scope. Nothing. Then he heard it. A faint, metallic clicking sound. His heart sank. Drones. They dropped to the ground behind a rusted hull. Jake peeked over the edge. Shapes moved through the mist ahead. Sleek black drones. Dozens of them, gliding over the ground like hunting animals. Rylos sent scouts. Zara whispered. Jake's radio crackled. A familiar voice slithered through the static. "Sergeant Carter," said Captain Rylos, voice smooth and mocking. "You can't hide forever. I always find my prey." Jake muted the radio. His pulse raced. He's close. Too close. The drones stopped. Their red eyes turned toward their hiding place. "Run," Jake shouted. They sprang up and sprinted toward the ruins. The drones swarmed after them, metal limbs skittering across stone and ash. Laser fire sliced through the air, searing the ground inches from their feet. The city grew closer with every step, but the drones were faster. One leaped forward, landing in front of Jake. Its steel jaws snapped open, revealing a plasma cannon. Jake fired without thinking. The blast shattered the drone's core. It collapsed in a heap. "Keep going," he yelled. Zara lunged past him, but another drone tackled her from behind. She fell hard, gasping as metal claws pinned her down. Jake fired. The shot hit the drone's joint, and it screeched in pain. He ran forward and slammed the butt of his rifle into the machine's head. The drone sparked and died. "Up," Jake said, hauling Zara to her feet. Blood trickled down her arm. The city entrance was 20 yards away. Beyond it lay a maze of buildings where they could hide. "Go," Jake shouted. They sprinted again. The drones closed in, firing nonstop. Energy blasts scorched Jake's armor, searing his skin. His legs burned from exhaustion. The city gate loomed ahead. An old stone archway half collapsed. They dove through it. Behind them, drones smashed into the entrance, blocked by the thick walls. They staggered into the shadowed streets. The city was a skeleton of war. Burned-out vehicles lined the roads. Buildings leaned against each other like wounded giants. Jake collapsed against a wall. His chest heaved. Zara slid down beside him, gripping her bleeding arm. "Close call," Jake said. "Not over," Zara said, voice strained. "Rylos will come himself now." As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled again. Jake didn't turn it off this time. "Well done," Rylos said. "Impressive. Most humans would have left the alien to die. But you, Sergeant Carter, you're special." Jake clenched his jaw. "Here's the truth," Rylos continued. "That Kryon next to you, she's a relic. The weapon, already mine. You're just running toward your deaths. Surrender, and maybe I'll let you live." Zara's hand tightened around the metal pipe she still carried. "Shut up," Jake said. Rylos chuckled softly. "See you soon, Sergeant." The radio went dead. Jake met Zara's gaze. "He's playing with us." "Yes," she said, "but he's right about one thing." "What's that?" She pointed toward the city center. A faint, pulsing blue light glowed above a distant tower. "The weapon," she said. He found it. Jake's blood turned cold. The bioweapon was no longer a secret, and if Rylos activated it, millions would die. "We have to stop him," Jake said. Zara nodded, her face hard with determination. "We fight, or we die." They stood and moved deeper into the city. Above them, hidden by shadows, a sleek black ship hovered silently. Inside it, Captain Rylos watched their progress through cold, unblinking eyes. He smiled. "The hunt ends soon," he whispered. "Fight for survival." The ruined city of Kryon IV stretched ahead like a maze of broken memories. Cracked streets wound through skeletal buildings, their windows hollow and empty like eyes that had seen too much. Dust swirled in the stale air as Jake Carter and Sarah crept through the narrow alleys, pulse rifles ready. Every sound made Jake's nerves tighten. The faint hum of drones echoed somewhere above, circling like vultures. His shoulder burned from the old wound, but he ignored the pain. The glowing blue light atop the central tower grew brighter with each step. That was their target, the core of the weapon. Zyra walked beside him, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion in her movements. Blood from her wounded arm had soaked through the makeshift bandage, but she kept going. Kryon warriors didn't stop until the mission was done. "How close?" Jake whispered. "Half a mile," she answered. "We reached the tower base, then the elevator shaft." Jake squinted through his rifle's scope. The tower rose like a jagged spear, topped by a soft blue pulse. That light came from the weapon's energy core. If Rylos activated it, every living thing on Kryon IV and beyond would die. "Why didn't your people destroy it?" Jake asked softly. Zyra's jaw tightened. "We tried. The core is protected by quantum locks. Only Kryon commanders knew the deactivation code. My captain died before he could tell me." Jake exhaled slowly. "So Rylos just needs the code to make it work." "No," she said. "He already has it. The drones sent him data from the bunker. We are out of time." Jake cursed under his breath. They needed to move faster. Suddenly, the sky above crackled with energy. A loud metallic voice boomed across the city. "Attention, trespassers," it said. "The life nullifier weapon is now armed. Activation in 30 minutes. All unauthorized beings will be eradicated." Jake's heart dropped. He's powering it up. Zira gripped her weapon. "We must reach the control room before activation." They broke into a sprint. The streets twisted and turned, each corner hiding potential danger. The blue light above pulsed faster now, beating like a monstrous heart. The tower loomed ahead, built from dark alloy and covered in ancient battle scars. They reached the base of the tower. The entrance was sealed by a thick blast door. Jake examined the keypad. Kryon symbols glowed faintly. "Can you open it?" he asked. Zira wiped her forehead, studying the panel. Her fingers danced across the controls. The screen blinked red. Locked. Rylos hacked the system. Jake stepped back and aimed his rifle at the control panel. "Stand back." He fired. The blast melted the keypad, and the metal door groaned. Smoke poured from the damaged mechanism. "Again," Tyra said. Jake fired 2 more shots. The door creaked, then slowly slid open with a painful screech. They rushed inside. The tower's interior smelled of scorched circuits and stale air. An elevator shaft yawned in the center. The lift was missing, leaving only cables stretching upward. Zira grabbed one of the thick cables. "Climb." Jake groaned inwardly but followed. His muscles screamed with each pull. The shaft was dark and silent, the walls cold to the touch. They climbed for what felt like hours, breath-heavy in the enclosed space. Halfway up, Jake paused. "Wait, do you hear that?" Zira froze. From above came a faint scratching sound, like claws on metal. "Drones," she whispered. "Yeah," Jake said, gripping his rifle. "And they're waiting for us." They kept climbing. The noise grew louder. Suddenly, a metal shape dropped from above. A drone, clinging to the cable with hooked limbs. Its eyes glowed red as it lunged at Jake. "Look out!" Zyra shouted. Jake swung his rifle one-handed and fired. The blast hit the drone's core, sending it tumbling past them into the dark, but more shapes appeared above. "Go! Fast!" Jake yelled. They scrambled upward. The drones followed, moving with unnatural speed. Red lasers streaked down the shaft, barely missing them. Jake's foot slipped. He dangled for a terrifying moment before Zyra caught his wrist. "Climb," she said, pulling him up with surprising strength. They'd reached the top ledge as the drones closed in. Zyra helped Jake onto the floor. He turned and fired down the shaft. The drones screeched and fell back. "That won't stop them for long," Jake said, chest heaving. The control room lay ahead. The blue light from the core bathed the walls in an eerie glow. Massive cables snaked from the glowing sphere in the center, a pulsating orb suspended above a platform. Rylos stood beside it. The hunter wore sleek, black armor that shimmered like liquid shadow. His hair was short and pale, his eyes sharp and cold. A pistol rested in his hand. "Ah," Rylos said, turning to face them. "The stubborn heroes. Right on time." "Step away from the core," Jake ordered, raising his rifle. Rylos smiled. "You really don't understand, do you?" He gestured to the glowing weapon. "This device will reshape the galaxy. Entire planets wiped clean. Chaos. Panic. And from that chaos, we profit." Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're insane." Rylos shrugged. "Sanity is overrated." He turned toward Zyra. "And you've survived far longer than I expected." Zyra's eyes burned with rage. "I swore to stop you. Today, I fulfill that oath." Rylos aimed his pistol at her. "Then die with honor." He fired. Jake lunged, pushing Zyra aside. The blast hit him in the chest. The impact threw him backward. Pain exploded across his body as he hit the floor. "Jake!" Zyra screamed. His vision blurred. The world tilted. Rylos laughed and turned back to the core, fingers dancing across the control panel. The weapon's hum intensified. The blue light turned blood red. The countdown display appeared. 5 o'clock. 4:59. 4:58. "Goodbye, Sergeant," Rylos said softly. Zyra knelt beside Jake, eyes wide with fear. His armor was scorched, his breathing shallow. "Stay with me," she begged. Jake coughed, forcing his eyes open. "The weapon," he gasped. "Stop it." Zyra looked at the core. The red glow grew stronger. The clock ticked down. She stood, gripping her weapon with renewed determination. Rylos smiled. "Come, Kryon warrior. Face me." Zyra charged. Race against time. The countdown clock glowed red, casting an eerie light across the control room. 4:57. 4:56. 4:55. Zyra gripped her weapon and charged at Rylos, her legs burning with exhaustion. The hunter smiled, stepping back with calm, predatory grace. His black armor shimmered like liquid shadow, blending with the dim light. He raised his pistol. Zyra dived to the side. The blast scorched the ground where she had stood moments earlier. She rolled, came up on one knee, and hurled her metal pipe like a spear. Rylos dodged easily. "Is that the best the Kryon guard can do?" he taunted. Zyra didn't answer. She lunged toward the core's control console, hoping to reach the system before Rylos stopped her. But he moved faster, cutting her off. His pistol swung down toward her head. She ducked. The weapon smashed into her shoulder, sending pain shooting down her arm. She staggered but didn't fall. The warrior instinct in her refused to surrender. Rylos aimed his pistol at her chest. "Goodbye," he said. A shot rang out, but not from his gun. Rylos jerked sideways, armor sparking. A burn mark bloomed on his shoulder. His eyes widened in surprise. He turned toward the source of the blast. Jake Carter lay on the ground, pulse pistol clutched in his shaking hands. Blood dripped from the scorched wound in his chest, but his finger stayed on the trigger. His face twisted with pain, but his eyes were clear. "You're not killing her today," Jake rasped. Rylos snarled. His pistol fired toward Jake. Zira screamed and threw herself between them. The blast slammed into her side. The force knocked her backward into the console. She hit the metal with a sickening crack and collapsed to the floor. 432, 431, 430. Jake crawled toward her, pain ripping through every nerve. Xyra. Her breathing was shallow. Blood seeped from the wound on her side, staining the floor dark. "You have to stop him," she whispered. Jake's vision blurred. His hands trembled as he tried to press against her wound. "Stay with me," he begged. "Please." Her eyes fluttered. "The core. Destroy it." Rylos stood beside the weapon's control panel, one hand clutching his burned shoulder. His other hand danced across the keys. Symbols glowed on the screen. The red light from the core intensified, casting the room in a crimson haze. "You're too late," Rylos said, his voice cold and triumphant. "When that clock hits 0, every living thing on this planet will die. And then, I'll sell the technology to the highest bidder." Jake's vision swam, but he forced himself to his knees. He gripped his rifle, breathing hard. The bioweapon pulsed louder now, like a heartbeat. The countdown ticked away relentlessly. 4 o'clock, 3:59, 3:58. Rylos smiled at him. "Sit down, Sergeant. Save your strength. Die with dignity." Jake's fingers tightened around his weapon. "I don't do dignity." He fired. The blast hit the core's protective shield, sparking harmlessly. Rylos laughed. "That shield can withstand planetary bombardment. Your toy rifle won't scratch it." Jake's mind raced. They couldn't hack the system. Rylos had locked the controls. They couldn't destroy the core through brute force. He glanced around the room. The power conduits connected the core to the tower's main grid. Thick cables snaked along the walls. Power lines. "Xyra," he said, leaning close. "How strong is that core?" She coughed. "Enough to kill a planet. What if we overload it?" Her eyes widened with understanding. "It would. Self-destruct." "How?" Xyra lifted a trembling hand toward the power conduits. "We cut the stabilizers. Too much energy. Core melts down." Rylos heard her. His smile vanished. "No." Jake fired at the conduits. The first shot hit dead center, blowing apart the protective casing. Sparks rained down. Rylos lunged forward. Jake fired again. The shot grazed the hunter's leg, slowing him. 3:30, 3:29, 3:28. Jake scrambled toward the exposed power lines. He tore a knife from his belt and jammed it into the thickest cable. The metal blade sparked. Electricity surged through the core. The blue sphere turned orange, then white-hot. Rylos screamed and fired wildly at Jake. One blast seared Jake's leg. He collapsed, teeth grinding against the pain. The core crackled. Warning alarms blared across the room. The countdown display blinked erratically. 2:58, 2:57, 2:56. Rylos sprinted for the exit. "You fools, you'll destroy us all." Jake dragged himself upright. His rifle was empty. His pistol was out of reach. The only weapon left was the knife buried in the conduit. He pulled it free, ignoring the burn as electricity scorched his palm. Rylos reached the doorway. Jake hurled the knife with every ounce of strength he had left. The blade struck Rylos in the back of the neck, piercing the armor. Rylos choked. His knees buckled. He fell face first to the floor, unmoving. Jake sagged against the console. His body shook from the effort. The core's hum turned into a shrill whine. The countdown raced faster now. The overload had worked. 2:30, 2:29, 2:28. "Jake," Xyra whispered. "We need to get out." He stumbled to her side. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused. "Can you stand?" She shook her head. Jake knelt, wrapped her arm around his shoulders, and lifted her. His legs screamed in protest. Blood loss made the room tilt. But he held on. They staggered toward the elevator shaft. The cables they had climbed were gone, burned by the power surge. Jake spotted a maintenance ladder bolted to the wall. "Hold on," he whispered. He set Sarah on his back, her arms around his neck. Then he started climbing. 2:00, 1:59, 1:58. Each rung was agony. The tower vibrated as the core's meltdown intensified. Sparks rained from the walls. The metal grew hotter with every second. Halfway up, the ladder bent under the heat. A chunk of debris fell from above. It smashed into Jake's shoulder, nearly knocking him loose. "Jake," Zyra gasped. "I'm okay," he said through clenched teeth. The top hatch was just feet away. 110, 19, 18. He reached the hatch and slammed his fist against it. The seal popped open. Cold, dusty air rushed in. They emerged onto the tower's roof. The core, now a white-hot sphere of plasma, crackled below. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Jake spotted an old emergency glider parked near the edge. The small craft was covered in dust, but intact. He laid Sarah inside and strapped her in. He climbed into the pilot's seat and hit the ignition. Nothing happened. 0:30, 0:29, 0:28. Come on, Jake muttered, slamming his fist against the console. The engine sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. The glider shot forward. Behind them, the core exploded. A shockwave of blue fire erupted from the tower, spreading across the city in a dome of destruction. The glider tilted wildly. Jake fought the controls. The heat licked at their tail as they shot beyond the blast zone. The explosion consumed the tower, the city, and every drone still in range. The sky turned blinding white. Then darkness returned. Jake guided the glider to a shaky landing on a distant hill. He slumped in his seat, gasping. Beside him, Syra opened her eyes. "We did it." Jake looked back at the burning ruins. The weapon was gone. Rylos was dead. Kryon IV was safe. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did it." Syra squeezed his hand. Together. He squeezed back. Always. The last stand. The sky above Kryon IV glowed with the dying embers of the core explosion. Smoke spiraled upward, painting the horizon in streaks of ash and fire. From their perch on the barren hill, Jake Carter and Sarah watched the ruined city collapse into itself. The weapon was gone. The tower reduced to molten slag. The ground beneath the glider trembled as the shockwave settled. Jake slumped against the pilot's seat, body screaming with exhaustion. Every breath was a battle. His chest wound burned with raw, unrelenting pain. His legs ached from the climb, the chase, the fight. His hands still shook from the electric surge when he overloaded the core. Beside him, Syra sat upright but tense, cradling her injured side. Blood stained her gray skin, and her breathing was shallow. Yet her eyes remained sharp, scanning the horizon. Krylon warriors did not rest until the mission was complete. "We stopped it," Jake said, his voice hoarse. "That thing. It's gone." Syra gave a slow nod. "Yes. The weapon is destroyed." Jake exhaled heavily and closed his eyes. Relief washed over him in waves. The weapon was gone. The life nullifier, the bioweapon that could have wiped out entire worlds, was nothing but twisted scrap. Billions of lives were safe. The cost had been high. Blood, sweat, pain, and the constant weight of choices made. But it was over. Or so he thought. A sharp, rhythmic beep sounded from the glider's console. Jake's eyes snapped open. Syra leaned forward and tapped the screen. A transmission was coming through. An unfamiliar symbol flickered on the display. a black serpent wrapped around a planet. Jake didn't recognize it, but Zyra's face darkened. "What is it?" Jake asked. "The mark of Rylos's network," she said. "The Shadow Syndicate." Jake straightened. He was working with others. Zyra gave a grim nod. He was never alone. The Syndicate trades in forgotten tech from old wars. Bioweapons, mind control devices, planetary disruptors. Rylos was just one of their hunters. The transmission crackled to life. A voice, smooth and cold, filled the cabin. "To the humans who destroyed our core, we see you. We know who you are. Sergeant Jake Carter of Earth Command. The Vizura of the Kryon Guard. You have cost us a valuable weapon. This will not be forgotten." Jake's heart sank. "They're coming." The voice continued. "We do not forgive. We do not stop. Run if you wish. We will find you. The Syndicate always finds its prey." The transmission ended with a low hiss. The serpent emblem burned on the screen before fading into black. Jake cursed under his breath and punched the dashboard. "Damn it. We didn't stop anything. We just lit a signal flare for every Syndicate operative out there." Zyra's eyes remained locked on the horizon. "This war isn't over," she said softly. Jake followed her gaze. In the distance, several black shapes appeared in the sky. Sleek, angular ships rising from behind the ruined city. Their engines hummed like angry hornets. Red lights flickered on their hulls. "Shadow Syndicate dropships," Zyra said. "They're here." Jake gritted his teeth. His body wanted to collapse. But there was no time. Survival demanded action. "Can this thing fly?" he asked, gripping the glider's controls. Zyra hesitated. "Short range only. Emergency power cells." "Short range is better than no range." He activated the engine. The glider sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. The small craft lifted shakily off the ground. The dropships grew larger with each passing second. "They see us," Zyra said, eyes on the red targeting beams sweeping the ground. "They won't catch us," Jake said. He jammed the throttle forward. The glider shot toward the low hills to the north. The dropships followed. The chase began. The glider rattled as it cut through the dusty air. Red beams from the pursuing ships sliced past them, leaving scorched lines across the rocky terrain. Jake gripped the controls tightly. "We can't outrun them forever." Zyra leaned over the navigation panel. "There's a canyon 2 kilometers ahead, deep and narrow. If we reach it, we can lose them. Then let's pray these engines last that long." The glider weaved through jagged ridges. The dropships closed the distance. Plasma cannons fired in rapid bursts. One blast struck the glider's tail. The craft lurched sideways. Warning alarms screeched. "Stabilizers failing," Zyra said, checking the diagnostics. "Hang on." Jake veered left. The glider skidded through the air, engine sputtering. The canyon appeared ahead, dark, deep, and twisting like a snake through the landscape. The closest dropship fired again. The blast seared past the cockpit, so close that the windows glowed from the heat. Come on," Jake muttered. He angled the glider toward the canyon mouth. The dropship fired once more. The plasma bolt struck the right wing. The metal sheared off with a deafening crack. The glider spun, smoke trailing from its side. "We're going down," Zyra shouted. Jake fought the controls. The canyon entrance loomed ahead. He angled the nose downward, using gravity to guide them. The glider scraped against the canyon wall, sparks flying. The engines coughed one last time and died. The craft plunged into the canyon's shadowed depths. Jake pulled the emergency tube lever. The burst of air brakes slowed their descent. The glider slammed into the canyon floor with a bone-rattling crash. Silence followed. Jake groaned and unbuckled his harness. His body ached with fresh bruises. "Zyra." "I'm here," she said, coughing. "Alive." Outside, the hum of dropship engines passed overhead. The Syndicate ships hovered at the canyon's edge, their sensors sweeping the ground. Jake grabbed his rifle. "We need to move. Now." They climbed out of the wreckage and scrambled toward the canyon walls. The ground was uneven, covered in shattered stone. The dropships hovered above, their searchlights scanning the canyon floor. "They won't leave," Xira said. "They're hunters." Jake's mind raced. "Then we give them a reason to." He knelt beside the glider's remains and pried open the fuel core. The reactor cell hummed faintly. "Overload the fuel cell," he said. "It'll blow big enough to send those dropships running." Thyra nodded and set to work. Her fingers moved quickly despite the pain. The searchlights drew closer. "Almost there," she said. Jake raised his rifle and fired at the canyon walls. The echoes made it sound like multiple shooters. "Done," Thyra shouted, setting the timer. 10 seconds. They sprinted deeper into the canyon. The fuel cell exploded behind them with a deafening roar. Flames shot upward. The canyon walls shook, sending rocks crashing down. The dropships scattered, dodging the falling debris. The canyon filled with dust and smoke. Jake and Sarah collapsed behind a boulder, hearts racing. "We made it," Jake gasped. "For now," Thyra said. "But they'll come back." Jake stared at the smoky canyon mouth. The Syndicate wasn't finished. They'd hunt them across the galaxy. "This is just the beginning," Jake said grimly. Xira met his gaze. "Then we fight, together." Jake extended his hand. She clasped it firmly. "Yeah," he said. "Together." In the sky above, the Shadow Syndicate regrouped. The serpent emblem glowed on their hulls, watching, waiting. The hunt wasn't over. Heroes are not forgotten. The canyon lay silent except for the crackle of dying flames from the exploded glider. Smoke curled into the sky, masking the faint morning light. Jake Carter sat with his back against the cold stone wall, pulse rifle across his lap. His body ached from head to toe. Wounds, burns, exhaustion pressing down on him like a mountain. Beside him, Thyra tightened a torn cloth around her injured side. Her breath was shallow, face pale, but her eyes were sharp. She watched the canyon entrance like a predator waiting for its prey. "They'll come back," Jake said softly. "They never stop hunting," she agreed. The Shadow Syndicate had retreated after the explosion, but it was only temporary. Rylos was dead, but his network was vast. They'd wanted revenge, and they knew who Jake and Thyra were. A faint rumble echoed through the canyon floor. Jake tensed. "Engines," Thyra said, voice grim. Jake stood, raising his rifle. The sound grew louder. Shadows passed overhead. 3 Syndicate dropships hovered at the canyon's edge, searchlights piercing the gloom. Red targeting lasers swept the canyon walls, searching. Jake's mind raced. Their weapons were low, their bodies broken. No escape routes left. "We need a miracle," he muttered. "Or a good death," Thyra said, standing beside him. The dropships descended, engines whining. Black armored soldiers rappelled down on thick cables, rifles gleaming in the dusty light. Syndicate infantry, mercenaries, and killers with no mercy. They fanned out in precise, practiced formations. Jake counted 12. Too many. His radio crackled. A voice, deep and measured. "Sergeant Jake Carter," said the voice. "Lay down your weapon. Surrender the Kryon and yourself. No one has to die today." Jake glanced at Thyra. Her jaw tightened. "They don't leave witnesses," she said. "Yeah," Jake agreed. He thumbed the radio. "Come and get us," he said. The Syndicate moved in. Jake fired the first shot. The pulse blast hit the nearest soldier in the chest, dropping him instantly. Thyra followed, hurling a scavenged grenade toward the second group. The explosion sent rock shards through the enemy line. The canyon erupted with noise. Lasers crisscrossed the air. Jake ducked behind a boulder, firing short bursts to keep the enemy pinned. Thyra crouched beside him, her weapon aimed at the cable lines still hanging from the dropships. Cut their escape, she said. She fired. The cable snapped, sending 3 soldiers plummeting. Their screams were lost in the chaos. Move, Jake shouted. They sprinted toward a narrow crevice along the canyon wall. Plasma blasts scorched the ground behind them. Zyra stumbled, her injured leg giving out. Jake caught her and hauled her forward. A soldier appeared from the shadows ahead, rifle raised. Jake fired first. The blast hit the soldier's helmet, sending him sprawling. The crevice gave them a moment of cover. They pressed against the cold stone, chests heaving. "There are too many," Jake said. "Then we take as many as we can with us," Zyra replied. The enemy regrouped, advancing in tight formation. The lead soldier raised a comm unit. "Target confirmed. Prepare orbital strike," he said. Jake's heart froze. "They're going to flatten the canyon," he said. "Burn the evidence," Zyra said grimly. The Syndicate soldiers retreated toward the canyon entrance. Overhead, the dropships angled upward. The air crackled with gathering energy. A pinpoint targeting laser marking the canyon floor for an orbital strike. Jake looked at Zyra. "We can't let them walk away." She met his gaze, understanding instantly. The canyon walls. We bring them down. A few 100 meters away, an old Kryon artillery node jutted from the rock, a relic from the war. Its targeting sensors still blinked faintly. If they could overload the power cell, it might cause a rock slide. "Cover me," Jake said. Zyra nodded and stepped from cover, firing at the retreating soldiers. The Syndicate returned fire immediately. Red beams shattered rocks around her. One blast grazed her shoulder. She staggered but kept firing. Jake sprinted toward the artillery node. He reached the metal control panel and ripped off the access cover. Wires hung like veins from an open wound. "Think, Jake, think." He found the main capacitor line and yanked it free. The artillery turret groaned, its ancient systems whining to life. The barrel shifted, locking him onto the canyon wall. The power cell gauge flickered into the red zone. "Come on," Jake whispered. He bypassed the safeties and overloaded the charge. Sparks flew from the control panel. The turret's barrel glowed with heat as it prepared to fire. The Syndicate soldiers realized what he was doing. They turned their guns toward him. "Jake!" Zyra screamed. He saw the blast too late. The plasma bolt struck his side, throwing him backward. Pain tore through him. The control panel blurred in his vision. The turret beeped, fully charged. Jake used his last ounce of strength to slam his fist onto the manual trigger. The turret fired. The shot hit the canyon wall with a deafening crack. The rock face shuddered, then collapsed. Thousands of tons of stone crashed down onto the Syndicate forces. The dropships tried to escape, but the avalanche caught them. Metal crumpled like paper. Explosions lit the canyon like fireworks. The shockwave rolled through the ground. Zyra dived toward Jake, shielding him with her body as debris rained around them. Then came silence. Zyra blinked dust from her eyes. The canyon entrance was gone, buried under rubble. The Syndicate was dead. No more searchlights. No more drones. She turned to Jake. His breathing was shallow. Blood soaked his armor. His eyes were half closed. "Jake," she whispered, cradling his head. His lips moved. She leaned closer. "Did we win?" he rasped. Her throat tightened. "Yes, we won." He gave a faint smile. "Good, because I'm tired of running." His eyes closed. "No," she whispered. "Stay with me. Stay." But his body went limp. Zyra bowed her head, pressing her forehead to his. Kryon warriors did not cry, but in that moment she felt the sting of tears. Hours passed. The sun rose, casting long shadows over the wreckage. Zyra sat beside Jake's body, unmoving. A low hum broke the silence. She looked up. A massive Earth command cruiser hovered above the canyon, engines rumbling. Shuttles descended. Soldiers in gray armor poured out, weapons ready. They surrounded Tyra, but held their fire when they saw Jake. A high-ranking officer stepped forward, face hard as stone. His eyes softened when they fell on Jake. "Sergeant Carter." Tyra nodded. "He saved this planet," she said hoarsely. "He stopped the weapon. He stopped the Syndicate." The officer's jaw tightened. "We received his distress signal. Just too late." He knelt beside Jake and touched his shoulder. He disobeyed orders, but he saved millions. The officer stood and faced his men. "Prepare an honor transport," he ordered. "Sergeant Jake Carter died a hero." Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. The officer spoke softly. "We owe him. And you." She squeezed Jake's cold hand one last time. Weeks later, Earth Command broadcast Jake's story across human space. Footage of Kryon IV's destruction, the bioweapon core, and Jake's sacrifice spread like wildfire. He was posthumously awarded the Galaxy Cross for valor. But one detail never made the official reports. 3 days after the battle, Syra visited a secret Earth Command base. A medical pod opened. Jake Carter stepped out, weak but alive. "Guess I missed the funeral," he said. Syra smiled faintly. "Heroes never died. Jake, not really." He squeezed her hand. "The Syndicate's still out there." She nodded. "Then we fight." Together, they walked into the unknown, ready for the next battle. Because heroes are not forgotten.